Hello everyone, in this video we will talk about the issue of military and defense diplomacy. To start this discussion or to serve as a launching pad or jumpstart this discussion, I would like first to differentiate what is the different conceptions between the concept of military diplomacy and defense diplomacy. Military diplomacy, labeled here with the acronyms of MD, is a military to military relation and arrangement that involves the deliberate application of a nation of its military assets and resources in non-violent ways and in bilateral or multilateral setting to attain positive outcomes for its security. On the other hand, defense diplomacy is a broader category that includes both the uniformed and civilian components of the defense establishment. So, based on the definitions that have been explicitly listed in this PowerPoint slide, you will see that the difference between military diplomacy and defense diplomacy is the involvement. It lies on the nature of the involvement of the sector that serves as the main agents or the main actors in the conduct of this diplomatic engagement. So basically, when we talk about military diplomacy, we talk about the military sector. On the other hand, when we talk about defense diplomacy, we talk about the involvement of both military sector and the civilian sector. So actually, this kind of diplomatic arrangement is evident if you will check, for example, here in the Philippines, if we are going to check the if we are going to check the nature and organizational structure of the AFP and of the Department of Defense. Because basically, if you will check the offices, the organizational layout or blueprint of the of these concerned departments, one of them is actually what? Despite that they belong to the military and defense sector and that they address these kinds of military issues, one of them is entitled as the Office of Civil Defense. So it is not necessarily a quasi, but their concerns and involvement are actually a mixture of both military and civilian concerns. Okay, while military and defense diplomacies are different, both of them are oxymorons. So why is it that military and defense diplomacies are considered as oxymorons? So basically, you can look at it on the literal meaning of the two words that have been merged to describe or label this kind of diplomatic engagement. So using the word military or defense and then the other word diplomacy, you will see that these are what? These are two words merged, but the meanings of these words are totally antagonistic because you will find them, these two concepts, you will find them at the opposite sides of the foreign policy instrument spectrum. At the farther side, at the extreme side in the right, which means I mean, remember the foreign policy instruments that we've discussed. So the most extreme at one side, for example, the most extreme form of foreign policy engagement is the total declaration of war. On the other hand, the the extreme opposite of the total declaration of war is what? The use of diplomacy. So this is the meaning. Why is it that for some diplomatic studies scholars, they treat that these concepts are oxymorons, uh, despite that they are a real phenomenon happening in the international affairs. The very function of these concepts represents a figure of speech because of the paradoxical literal meaning of the two words that were combined. Okay, so what are the purposes of military diplomacy or defense diplomacy? Number one, to attain positive outcomes for the security of a nation. Um, Traditionally, our conception of security, our definition of security has been what? In the study of international relations, our conception of security has been very state centric and have been focused on the ways and means to assure state survival. However, in the latter part of the 20th century, or as we welcome the 21st century, particularly in 1994, the definition of security in international relations have been like, what's the proper word? Have been democratized. Why? Because right now we have now two conceptions of security. Number one is the traditional security issues. On the other hand is the non-traditional security issues. The traditional security issues, they are usually characterized as state-centric because the concerns of this one is, I mean, the concerns of this first category has been obsessed. I'm repeating or reiterating that the concern of this one is related to the traditional notion of security because it is concerned with state survival. So the concerns of this is warfare, economic statecraft. So you use sanctions or embargoes, etc. So those kinds of coercion. On the other hand, when we talk about non-traditional security issues, these are traditional security issues that may involve both states and non-state actors, and that these security issues are not solvable by having a unilateral state action alone. These security issues, as they are called non-traditional, are these security issues require international cooperation. So why? Because these security issues are what? Well, at a certain extent, they are man-made, but they do not have the consciousness or the faculty of agency that they can restrain themselves or not. So what are these security issues? Every time that I talk about these non-traditional security issues, I always use the example because I think this is the concept that really encapsulates the scope of the nature of non-traditional security issues. So this concept, the paradigm introduced by the United Nations Development Program in 1994, we call it human security. So this is the new conception of security in which if the traditional security issues are concerned with state survival and they are very state-centric in orientation, non-traditional security issues, or AKA human security issues, they are anthropocentric. When I use the word anthropocentric, it means it's people-centered. It is concerned with the security of the individual human person. And based on the document um, released by the United Nations Development Program, human security is concerned with 7 dimensions. I will enumerate that on the handout that I will give. So it is concerned with the following, like for example, environmental security. So it refers to climate change, global warming, pollution, for example, in ASEAN, haze problems, food security, personal security, community security, economic security, cultural security, and the like. So it's no longer, well, it's still concerned about the security of the state, but the main focus is the security and safety of the individual human person that some security scholars regarded regarded non-traditional security issues as both freedom from needs and freedom from wants. Second, the second purpose of military diplomacy and defense diplomacy is to develop armed forces for capacity building to considerably more challenging tasks such as preventing conflicts from arising opposing groups and to settle conflicts and disputes. So actually, this is a 180-degree turnover of the traditional or conventional purpose of the military. Why? Because in the past, military is used to what? To engage in conflict and dispute, to assert that I am more powerful, I am in the right side, and you are weak, or I can subdue or subject the other party, or I can dominate the other party. But right now, it's humankind understood and discovered that yes, we can use our military might not to inflict additional conflicts or aggravate additional conflicts in global affairs, but to utilize to utilize this function, I mean, to utilize the capacity of the military to promote peacekeeping and to engage in peace building activities. Third function, number three, to develop confidence, trust, and transparency of the past or potential rivals. So basically, through the exchanges and interactions between the military of of two parties who are enemies before or potential enemies in the future, they can build rapport and confidence building by showing the culture and the stance of the other side. So it can develop mutual understanding in both sides, from both sides. So as I have said before in the previous slide, it was mentioned that before the purpose of the military is to exhibit the military might of a country, but right now they discover that the potential of the military to utilize the potential of the military to conduct peacemaking and peace building activities. So in some for some scholars, they categorize the purposes of military into two. Number one is transformative purpose, and the other hand is conservative purpose. Let us first talk about the conservative purpose of the military. Number one, to perform interoperability and capacity building among allies and partners. I think I already discussed that. Second, build strategic depth in one's own backyard. Third, gain influence in countries where military is a key actor. Third, apprehend strategic culture of other states. So when we talk about strategic culture, if you remember our foreign policy classes before, strategic culture refers to what? To the political elite opinion that that has the potential to shape the foreign policy decision of a specific state. Fourth, build crisis-proof bilateral relationships through establishment of bilateral networks and improving mutual understanding. And lastly, build the capacity of other states and their militaries to contribute to shared tasks. On the other hand, when we talk about transformative purposes of military, we can also refer to the ability of the military to democratize civil-military relations. So it's like knowledge transfer. If one country with a very potent military sector and that military sector was able to respect the demarcation between military duties and civilian responsibilities and rights, that kind of model or lessons can be transferred to other countries, and that can be conducted through military and defense diplomacy. Next is promote accountability inside the military. So, of course, there is military culture. There's this organizational culture um, present in the inside the military sector. So there are some countries who are what? For example, if you will look on their performance in terms of human rights achievement, despite that they have a very well adept, equipped military, they were able to what? To harness that the potential of the military not for the state to evolve into an authoritarian state, but into a well-functioning democratic state. So as I have said, those kind of lessons, it can be transferred to other countries. Some examples of doing military diplomacy. Number one, bilateral and military contacts between senior commanders and senior chiefs. And this has been what? This has been a an activity that's being conducted, for example, in the case of the Philippines, in terms of bilateral prior to the Duterte administration. I think that was during Gloria to Noynoy. There's this exchanges between the senior commanders and senior chiefs from the Philippine military and the American military. In terms of multilateral contacts, it is usually performed under the platform of the United Nations, particularly with the UN peacekeeping forces or the Blue Helmets. Second, appointment of defense attaches to foreign countries. So this is performed when, imagine, each country has its own embassy in a foreign country. So that embassy is under the supervision and purview of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of that country. So the Department of Defense or the military sector of the of that country can send a military representative to station in that embassy, and the title of that representative will be defense attaché. Third, bilateral defense cooperation agreements. It is usually manifested to different MOUs and MOAs. Usually, in terms of military diplomacy, the usual kind of document that's being forged is either a memorandum of understanding and memorandum of agreement. It is very rare. The instances are rare if a military agreement will lead to a treaty. It means that the the because if a country will pursue a treaty, it means that the country is really serious in that kind of commitment. So those documents have level of seriousness. So the most or yeah, the vaguest, the most ambiguous among them is the memorandum of understanding, and then higher in terms of ranking of commitment is the following that is the memorandum of agreement, and then the highest among them is a treaty. How is it that these three documents are different from each other? Because um, aside from being vague, the MOU, the difference between a treaty, treaty, MOA, Memorandum of Agreement, and Memorandum of Understanding, the difference is that um, Memorandum of Agreement and treaties have a more detailed action plan to execute, unlike with Memorandum of Understanding. Fourth, provision of expertise and advice on the democratic control of armed forces. This is the one I've been saying earlier. There's this role of military for knowledge transfer that if this kind of setup was able to applied in our context, we need to know how can it be applied in other countries so that that country will have a healthy democracy, a healthy respect to human rights, and determine what are the conditions that needed to be solved, in order for to promote the healthy relationship between the military and civilian sector. For a fifth, defense management and military technical areas. Six, contacts and exchanges between military personnel and units. I think one good example between this is the Balikatan exercises, the joint military exercises. Seven, ship visits. During the time of Noynoy Aquino, there's a number of American ships that have visited the Philippines. Same applies with President Duterte that there's an increasing number of military vessels from China that have visited the ports and docks of the Philippines, and in the late I mean in the previous 2 years, most of the ships have stationed in Davao, and it's not only confined to ships but also to air carriers, the air force of the Chinese military. Next, placement of military personnel in the armed forces or defense ministries of other countries. Provision of military equipment and other material aid. So this is related in the case of the Philippines to the AFP modernization program, that we are modernizing the equipment, the human capacity, and training of our own soldiers. And then bilateral and multilateral exercise for training purposes. So as I end this lecture, I would like to offer some of my reflections about military and defense diplomacy. So based on the facts and concepts that I have introduced in the previous slides, let us first note this first reflection. Number one, the military sector must account new conceptions and definitions of global security. As the concept of security continues to become fluid, as I have said, it has become state-centric to anthropocentric, new forms of military cooperation shall be developed and employed. And as to the world, I think it's my belief, as as our current situation grapples with the COVID-19 pandemic, I think new forms of military cooperation shall be I am optimistic that new forms of military cooperation shall be devised in order to address the limitations and restrictions imposed by the current pandemic. Second, the military as a foreign policy source because of their organizational culture. So in this case, we revisit our foreign policy analysis classes. When we talk about organizational culture, it refers to the collective beliefs of a government office that this belief shapes the response of that government office to influence the foreign policy decision making. So in this case, we talk about the collective beliefs of the military sector that can, aside from issues about material interest or like funding, this belief informs that interest so that that kind of interest shall be presented in the decision-making body that has the potential to transform the foreign policy decision of a specific state. Third, the military leaders themselves can constitute a strategic culture. Why? Because in some countries, the military elite or the military leaders are the ones who are being what? Consulted, of course, depending on the issue, but there are some countries that the military leaders are the ones being consulted in terms of global security issues. So since they have a privileged position in that kind of consultation in the decision making process, it means that they are the elite, therefore their opinion constitutes the definition, it satisfies the definition required of the concept of what we call strategic culture. And then lastly, we can also designate military leaders, their collective opinion and belief as an epistemic community. So what is an epistemic community? It's again an it is a constructivist approach in international relations that aims to look on the role of experts in shaping foreign policy decisions. So in the case of the military leaders, of course, military leaders from one side to other side, there's cooperation. They can develop if yeah, they have the capacity and ability to develop a collective opinion and belief based on their experience and expertise in military battle and in addressing harsh issues. So in that case, their experience and knowledge of what happens on the ground, that can be considered as an expertise. And through this expertise, decision makers can listen and account their narratives, their opinions, and their proposals so that these decision makers may account those factors. So and by through accounting those factors, that can be translated into a foreign policy decision.